Welcome to this, our latest Astley Media Project Positivity webcast. Today we're in conversation with football commentator John Roeder. We caught up with John ahead of the last game of the season and talked to him about what it's like broadcasting in lockdown and working for Match of the Day. Enjoy. Hi John, how are you doing?
Morning Mark, yeah, I'm very well indeed. Yes, you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Good. Yeah, end of the week for us, so things are looking up.
End of the season for me this weekend. Last weekend of the Premier League, much delayed, of course, because of the COVID-19 situation. So it's a season that for me started in early August of last year and will finish in late July of this year. So almost a year, but obviously 3 months off in the middle.
Yeah. And Southampton, you're off to, is that right?
Southampton against Sheffield United on the final day, yeah. Sheffield United, brilliant season. They will finish in the top 10 no matter what. Southampton will finish at least 12th, possibly 11th, which is amazing considering where they were back in about November when they were in the relegation zone. So it's a kind of game that has little bits riding on it, but it's just great to be back at football again. Great.
Yeah. What do you think the secret to Sheffield's success has been this season?
Teamwork, the manager, almost the four musketeers ethos, all for one and one for all. I've done quite a lot of Sheffield United and they really are absolutely together. They're actually a joy to watch, and they've come up with the attitude of we're going to give it a really good crack, which is basically opposite to quite a lot of teams, who come up and think, oh, well, if we avoid relegation, that'll be a real bonus. And they've been a joy to watch, and Chris Wilder is a joy to interview. He's a really nice fella, and good luck to him. And hopefully, other clubs who come up from the Championship to the Premier League will adopt their model and give it a real good go.
Yeah, and Wilder's a very practical, down-to-earth sort of guy, isn't he? He's not like the sort of image you'd have of a football manager.
You can imagine going out for a beer with him.
Yeah. I think prior to COVID as well, he was still getting the bus to the training ground occasionally.
Oh, he tells tales about taking the bus and going down the pub and meeting his mates because he's a Sheffield United fan as well as the manager. And it's quite interesting. I did a game at Bramall Lane a few weeks ago where they scored a 93rd minute winner. It was literally virtually the last kick of the game against Wolves. And my first question in the post-match interview was, Chris, did you celebrate that last minute winner more as the Sheffield United manager or more as a fan on behalf of those who can't be here? And he just laughed, which was great, which was the right reaction sort of thing. And that's the sort of thing that I like about an interview. And actually I rang up and said, could you please include the question, because it puts the answer into context. And they did, and it was great. It was good.
Yeah, it's great to see a team like Sheffield in the mix and do so well, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So, John, what's it been like commentating in empty grounds? It's been strange as a viewer watching games with no fans there, even with the piped-in sound.
Yeah, personally, I don't like the piped-in sound at all. I will watch a game on the TV without the piped-in sound, and if I'm actually doing a game on site, we have the option of having the piped-in sound put into our headphones, but I always choose not to. I've done a lot of tournaments across the world for FIFA, football's world governing body, and it's a bit like being at an under-20 World Cup when the host nation aren't playing. So, for example, a few years ago, I did the Under-20 World Cup in South Korea. You might be in a 40,000-seater stadium because it's a double-headed day. There are two games in one day, and the first match features South Korea. So there's 35,000 people in there. The second match might feature, Australia against Cameroon. And of those 35,000, 34,799 disappear after the South Korea game. So you're in this massive stadium with hardly anybody in there. So it's a bit like that. It is strange, it is weird, but it's nice to be back at work, firstly, and secondly, to be seeing football going back on again, and other sports are slowly coming back as well, which is great.
Yeah, and I think one of the perils of the lack of crowd noise is you spend a bit more time apologising for the language, don't you?
Yeah, there is that. I mean, there's a difference, obviously, between if you're doing it live to air or if you're doing it for a highlights edit, which is for Match of the Day. I mean, obviously, I do a lot of games for what's called the World Feed for the EFL, for the Football League. And yeah, you do find yourself saying apologies for any language you might just have heard there, because those games are live. They go live everywhere, kind of thing. America, Australia, Africa, all that sort of thing. For Match of the Day, you don't necessarily have to say that because it's not going to make the edit. And if it does make the edit. They will actually sort of mute the sound very much, so you can't hear it. So on match today, you don't have to do that, but on a live transmission, you most certainly do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the that absence of crowd. Do you think it's affected the players, the way they perform, the way they react?
Yeah, I think it possibly has. I think the main thing is possibly the awarding of free kicks and contentious free kicks and maybe penalties and things like that, because obviously if you've got a home crowd and they're all howling for a decision to go in their favour, it might influence the referee in one way or another. I'm not saying that it does, but psychologically, it has to play a little bit of a part. And I think we're seeing a little less arguing perhaps of things that manifestly aren't what the players are actually arguing for. It has made a difference, but what it has made us realise, and I think this is the most important thing from the restart, what it has made us realise is that it's nothing without spectators. We need spectators, we need supporters, we need an atmosphere inside the ground, because otherwise you might as well be playing it on Hackney Marshes.
Yeah. And has that changed the way you commentate at all?
No, not really. As I say, because I've done games in big empty stadiums before, you do kind of think, what am I going to say here? Particularly if, excuse me, you're in a commentary position which is reasonably close to where the substitutes are, or near the dugout, for example. You think, oh, they might be hearing every word that I'm saying, but actually they're so wrapped up in the game, they're not actually going to be hearing what you're saying. So no, it hasn't really affected it at all. The other way that it's been affected is doing post-match interviews or pre-match interviews, because they have to be done obviously in accordance with social distancing. So the manager is one side of the advertising hoardings that go around the pitch, so they're actually on the grass. We're usually on the running track that goes around the edge of the track, and you do actually have a physical barrier in between you, which is good. So there's no handshakes or anything like that. And people just say hello, how are you, kind of thing. So that's changed it a little bit. You do find yourself with the temptation, because when you work in broadcasting, you hold a microphone in your hand. So for example, if I hold this pencil in my hand, you move it backwards and forwards with a microphone. But you don't have to do that anymore. And that takes a little bit of getting used to it. It's like, I suppose, driving on the left. It's different, but it's the same.
Yeah, and I understand the match day experience for you is very different, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. To be honest, sometimes the best part of covering a match is actually doing the bit beforehand, meeting up with friends that you haven't seen for a while, people on the circuit who may cover a particular club all season round. So you have a chat, you might have a cup of tea, a bit of spot of lunch, a bit of gossip, a bit of scandal, a bit of intrigue. It's like any workplace, really, except it's people that you don't meet every day. That doesn't happen anymore. You turn up, you park your car, you have to go through the temperature checks, you have to hand in your form that declares that you are free of any symptoms, and then, rather like Monopoly, you go straight to your position. You don't go anywhere else. The stadium is divided into different coloured zones, and we're only allowed into the amber zone. The red zone is the pitch surrounds, and the dressing room area, and the tunnel area. So we only go into the amber zone. And it's basically straight up to the position, and that's effectively where you stay until the end of the game, when you walk around the pitch to conduct the after-match interviews.
Yeah, it must be quite a strange experience for you.
It is a little bit weird, but we are very privileged, very fortunate in that we are there. And although it is our place of work, we are there, and we are enjoying the spectacle of live football in front of our eyes rather than through a television screen.
Yeah. No, yeah, it's great to see sport back on our screens. A lot of these chats we're doing, we're trying to look at some of the positives that have come out of the last few months, the way people have changed the way they do things, changed their attitudes, etc. Are there any positives that have come out of this COVID experience for you, John?
There are a few, most definitely. I mean, the biggest negative has been a lack of income. I could bang on all day about this, but people will know about the Excluded UK campaign, where basically self-employed people who didn't fulfil certain criteria weren't eligible for any form of government support, and that certainly was felt by me. I haven't received a penny, despite paying a lot of tax. Positives, Well, we needed to do something to diversify. And so I took an online course in teaching English as a foreign language, which taught me a lot about teaching techniques and taught me actually a lot about the English language, which is funny since I speak the English language for a living. I've also thought long and hard, and I'm in the process of establishing a couple of sideline businesses. But apart from that, no. I mean, the main positive for me is living in Devon, living by the seaside, with the dog, with the family nearby. It was, from that point of view, it wasn't as if one was being cooped up inside a flat in an inner city, with relatively few places to be able to go. So from that point of view, this part of the world is actually a rather beautiful place to be able to live. We're very fortunate to be able to live in this part of the world. So I think learning to appreciate what's actually around you. I think that's quite important. So what's within 2 or 3 miles that you can walk to and you possibly overlook. I mean, when I lived in London years and years ago, I never went and saw the tourist attractions, the big things that tourists would see: Buckingham Palace, Houses of Parliament, St Paul's Cathedral. Never went to them. But I lived in London. It's ludicrous, and yet we've been able to go and visit lots of places within 3, 4 miles, 5 miles or so, that really I'd never actually discovered before, because I've always been on the road or working towards the next match.
Yeah, no, I think in those early days where we were locked down, just going for a walk in your favourite sort of location, going to the beach, which you couldn't. You just suddenly realise the value of that. Yeah,
very, very, very much so. But yeah, it's been a challenging time, but it hasn't been as challenging, I will admit, for me, as it has been for many, many hundreds of thousands of people who've had things an awful lot worse. But yeah, it is what it is, isn't it? But it is great to be back at work and back with something to do.
Yeah, absolutely. But back to the day job. We often watching Match of the Day here, Carolina Cassay, and commentating on this match, going to John Roeder.
Usually near the end of the programme, it has to be said. My first game for Match of the Day was back when the programme returned to the BBC, so it was August 2004. And I was on last that day. It was Blackburn 1, West Bromwich Albion 1. And for some reason, I've had a lot of games, particularly this season, that have just been last in the running order. But that is determined on the day. It is interesting because people say, "Oh, do you commentate on the whole game, or do you do it afterwards?" Well, how am I going to do it afterwards? No, we are there. We do the whole 90 minutes, and we do the whole 90 minutes as if it's live, because you don't know what's going to happen. You may have a game which ends 5-4, which in the provisional running order, i.e. the running order that's done before the matches have even kicked off, might be, say, near the bottom. But if it finishes 5-4, it's going to be near the top, if not the top. So you have to be prepared for it to be maybe a 14, 15-minute edit, or it could be the minimum 6-minute edit. You just have to do what it is. So it is interesting when people say, "Oh, yeah, but you don't do it live, do you?" Yes, we do. Yes, we do. We absolutely do. What's the point in me travelling to, I don't know, Wolves, for example, to sit there for 90 minutes, do a couple of post-match interviews, and then dub on something afterwards? No, and that's why you hear people sort of sometimes make a mistake, because we're doing it live. We're doing it, rather than doing it live to air for Match of the Day, we're doing it live to an editing suite. But it is live. We do everything live.
And do you still get a buzz out of hearing your name?
Not especially. No. I think at first, yeah, definitely. I mean, I've been doing this for a long, long time now. I got a buzz the very first time. Certainly my dad, when he was alive, absolutely loved it, because his pals would sort of say, "Oh, just on Match of the Day again," because he and I used to watch it when I was little. I distinctly remember watching that and the big match on ITV on a Sunday afternoon. We watched it together, and it was amazing to actually feel. It was kind of like the same feeling as when I actually played in the same cricket team as him. And I'm sure that all fathers and sons, or mothers and daughters who've done things together, will appreciate, when you actually can do something together that one of you's done for a long time, and your offspring is now going to do that. I mean, that's just amazing. So my dad really, really, really enjoyed the fact that I was on Match of the Day. I mean, it was a phone call that changed my life. We were on holiday in Italy, and we went to the beach for the day, and I came back and my phone had been left in the safe in the hotel room, and there was a message on there saying from somebody at the BBC saying, can you give us a call back? And I said to my wife, I said, well, I'll give him a call when we get back to England. It was something like 40p, half a minute to phone back at that stage. And she said, no, this could be important. And I was on the phone for about 45 minutes at the end. And, and it was basically, the call was, would you like to join the Match of the Day team? Yes, please. Yes, because it's the pinnacle. It's the pinnacle of football broadcasting in this country. Yes, the BBC has just had a few live games in the Premier League, but, ask the average person, and I hate that phrase, but ask the average person in the street to name a football programme and they'll say Match of the Day. Yeah. Ask them to whistle the theme tune and they'll be able to do it. It is an iconic programme, and I'm very fortunate, very privileged to be just about to finishing my 16th season on Match of the Day, which is amazing.
Yeah, it's an institution, isn't it? Absolutely. Yeah. So how did you get into commentating in the first place, John?
It was a bit of an accident, to tell you the truth, Mark. When I went to university in Warrington, so midway between Manchester and Liverpool. Loved music. I mean, I loved football as a kid, and then when you're a teenager, sort of thing, music takes over. So I was going to all these gigs in Manchester and Liverpool, 82 to 85, great period. And we had a radio station at the university, and I'd already written about music for my local paper in Hampshire. And I just felt at home there, and I wanted to be a combination of John Peel and David Jensen, who were the rhythm kings on Radio 1 at the time in the evening. And so I wrote off to all these radio stations, and I got a job as soon as I left university. I got a sort of job with a promise of a full-time job when the franchise was renewed a few months later, at a station called Radio Victory in Portsmouth, which was just down the road from where I lived. And ended up working on the sport because of an extra £10. And it was literally dog's body job. And I just fell into doing sport because I'd always loved football. And then suddenly I realised that actually I could do this. And I got a job at BT working on Club Call, which was the horrendously expensive phone lines that used to ring for news on your particular club. Mm-hmm. And you'd spend the first minute as you presented that going waffling, because that was 40p into the coffers of BT. And then I got a job in local radio in Coventry, and I didn't expect to get a job in Coventry. There were two jobs going at the time. One was in Kent, one was in Coventry, and I thought I was in with a chance with Kent, but no chance with Coventry. And I was complete opposite. I got the job in Coventry, and suddenly I was a sports editor, and I'd had no journalism training. I'd had no experience necessarily of working in a newsroom. I'd worked in places where we gathered interviews and things and stuff like that. It was a bit too much. I was thrown in at the deep end, but I suddenly sort of found myself doing football commentaries because obviously that was part of the job. And I thought, I can do this. I can do this. I mean, actually talking into a microphone was no problem at all. I thought, I can really do this, and I loved it. And then I went to BBC Local Radio and into BBC National Radio. Off the back of that, went freelance in 1994, so quite some time ago now, working at Sky News on the news desk. Again, journalism training. It was all a question of picking it up as I went along and learning from errors and learning from others and learning by watching, viewing and listening. It hasn't been a career in inverted commas at all. It's been an accidental journey which has led me to where I am. And I wouldn't have changed it for the world.
Who were your idols back then?
Brian Moore. Absolutely, Brian Moore. I mean, people always say, it's a bit like people say, oh, do you prefer the Beatles or the Rolling Stones? Well, it was always, do you prefer John Motson or Barry Davis? And I'd say, well, neither, to be honest. Brian Moore's my man. I really, really liked his style of commentary. Nowadays, people like Clive Tyldesley, I think Clive is absolutely brilliant at football commentary. John Champion is another, Peter Drury is another. These are people who I really, really respect. But I mean, I really respect anybody who does the job that I do. And let's face it, it's not really a proper job. You know, I call out names randomly as they touch the ball and hopefully get the identity of the goal scorer right. And I've been lucky enough to travel the world as well. So it's been fantastic.
Do you think there are more opportunities these days for people to do what you do with the sort of plethora of channels now and the growth in things like women's sport, for instance?
There are more opportunities, but they are different opportunities. I'm fortunate. I mean, I came through at the stage where satellite television was suddenly exploding. So you had all these little niche sport channels which suddenly required people, and if you had a modicum of experience, they'd give you a go. And if you were asked back, you knew you'd done okay. So I worked for Eurosport, I worked for Sky Sports, I worked for Screen Sport, I worked for people like Live TV. I worked for ITV in the regions for 5 or 6 years. Nowadays, it's kind of different because the route I came up, local radio, national radio, regional television, national television, international television, doesn't really exist. A lot of people will have to go to a club and work for a club channel, whether that's on the internet or anything like that. Certainly, if you go to a football match now, particularly in the Premier League, the media team that turns up from both clubs is maybe 10, 11 people. You know, there's a lot of people because they're all dealing with Twitter and Facebook, and there may be an audio stream as well, and there's a camera person there normally, and somebody do the interviews, and two, maybe 3 press officers as well. So that's where people will really learn their job. The route that I took probably doesn't exist anymore, particularly because commercial radio now doesn't have sport. It just doesn't have sport at all. Commercial local radio, I mean. And BBC local radio has sport, but obviously, as we know at the moment, the BBC are having to cut back various things. So it's a different pathway, but there are opportunities. Oh, definitely opportunities. Yeah.
Yeah, having said all that, if people are still keen to do what you do, get into the business, what advice would you give them?
Watch to as much as you can, listen to as much as you can, and if you want to be on air, don't copy anybody. Absorb from them, use them, be influenced by them, but be yourself. And don't necessarily think, oh, I have to be on air to get a good job. When I work on a World Cup, we are usually in a production team of around about 100, and there is one person on air. Everybody else is working behind the scenes, whether that's in VT, whether it's in slow-mos, whether it's in EBS operations, camera people, sound people, you know, and these are actually the people who've been most affected by the summer, by the COVID-19, because obviously these people work all year round on sport. And if there's no sport to work on, there's no work. So I always say, don't actually necessarily think that you really should work on air, because off air is just as rewarding and can be actually a little more lucrative, and certainly can be have a little bit more security to your job than you would do if you're an on-air person, because it only takes one executive of one TV channel to go, I don't like that person's voice, or we need to bring somebody in, and you're out the door. Whereas producers and things, they can carry on doing a sterling job, which all of them do, for many years, for many different clients.
Obviously, the people at the top of still like your voice, John, are still like you, because you've had this long and illustrious
Thank
career.
Goodness. Well, it's long. I always people sort of say, well, you know, how have you done this? You know, I've been freelance for 26 years without a contract with anybody, and really it's because I think I can just come in, do a job, and go home again. I've never wanted to be a #1 commentator at any channel, because you're there to be shot at. I'm literally a squad member. I'm just sort of there. People hopefully know that I can come in, do the job, go home, get paid. Don't need nursemaiding, don't need sort of guiding through what to do. We'll just do a solid job, which is, you know, 8 out of 10 every week, and that's all that's required really, and won't create too much controversy or discussion about something that you may or not have said on air. You know, just do a solid job. I think if you can be a solid professional, you're almost like that player in a team whom all the teammates value, but never gets the publicity. Yeah, you know, the solid midfield player who just plays, doesn't necessarily score a hatful of goals, will chip in with a few, but is the person whom their teammates really value.
Yeah. But having said all of that, there must have been the odd gaff and hairy moment. So, well, tell us a couple of those.
There is, I think, a well-known saying amongst the commentary brethren anyway, that if you're 100% happy with what you've done, you should retire, because you should never be happy with what you've done. So player identification is the one. I mean, the worst thing you can do is misidentify a goal scorer. which is why you'll hear people say, oh, what a goal that is, great time for them to score. And it's basically because they haven't got a clue who's got it, and they're waiting for the slow motion to confirm it or something. Misidentification, bringing on a substitute in the World Cup match between Portugal and Spain in Russia. I looked down, thought it was number 11. It was actually number 17. The numbers were very, very close together. And I got it in my head, it was number 11. I didn't check that it was number 17, and I really should have done. And so for 5 minutes, player A was identified when player B actually was on. And 5 minutes later, player A was going to be introduced as a substitute. Not good. Not good at all.
Do you get people taking you to the task these days on social media if they spot any of these errors?
Slightly. I mean, social media is what it is. I think the thing is with commentary, it's very much like music. I mean, one person, Barry Davis said this, one person's favourite commentator is another one's pain in the backside. So, you know, you might like somebody, might not. I mean, there are some games where I watch where I think, oh, I wish you hadn't have said that, or you're talking too much. That's my main bugbear at the moment, people that talk too much. You know, I really want to be able to hear the silence and hear the noise, which again is what we're missing at the moment, because obviously with no crowds. Yeah, we've made mistakes. I've always made mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. Simple as that.
Yeah. No, I think often the art of commentating is not what the commentator says, it's what the commentator doesn't say.
The perfect example of that is the Aguero moment for Martin Tyler to Sky. Aguero, he knows he's going to score. Martin's talked about this a lot. He knows that Aguero is going to score. Aguero! And then if you count, because it's widely available on YouTube and things, if you actually count the space before his next words, it's a long time. Because of the atmosphere, because of the reaction, because of people's faces. Emotion is what everything is. Sport is about emotion. And it's a long time before Martin says something. That's perfect commentary for me. Perfect.
Yeah, and that's a real art form, isn't
it? Absolutely.
You alluded to earlier, you often interview the managers and players after the games. Must be a few anecdotes over your career. Any particular favourites?
Yeah, Mick McCarthy, when he was in charge at Wolves, lost at Bolton to a 93rd minute winner, really bad back pass. Striker nips in and scores. And depending on who is hosting the outside broadcast, whether it's a Sky, BBC or BT one, you have priority in terms of doing the interviews. This was a Sky hosted outside broadcast. It wasn't a live game. And the Sky reporter basically sort of said, Mick, you must be very disappointed with that. You know, gentle lob, not a great question, it has to be said. All right, what do you bloody think? and basically it got nowhere for about 3 minutes, and then it was my turn. It was literally same camera, and I just said to Mick, because he was kind of, I think, expecting more of the same. I said, Mick, I don't quite know what to ask you. I'm paid to commentate on a game and then ask a few questions afterwards, but I don't know what to ask you, because I can't imagine what your feelings are having conceded in the manner that you did at the time that you did. And halfway through this, he looked at me as if to go, what are you on about? But then he proceeded to give me 30 seconds of exactly what he felt like, which he hadn't given at all to the guy from Sky. And it was a risk, because he could have gone, well, if you can't think of any questions, I'm not going to give you any answers. But it was a risk, and it was a risk worth taking. And I got a perfect answer, and it was great telling. And again, like I said earlier, I actually rang up and said, please include the question, because it puts it into context. And they did. There's various other ones. David Moyes walking out because he was unhappy about a line of questioning from the first interviewer. And I was waiting for the second one. He never came back. Did apologise later. Monosyllabic answers. I mean, we are asking a lot of managers to talk in the 25 minutes or so immediately after full time, to actually come in and give a reasoned explanation of why they played well or why their team hadn't played well. And nowadays as well, they do have to do an awful lot of interviews, an awful lot. What with 2 TV, then the club TV, then radio, then maybe a press conference, then maybe another press conference for what it's called the Mondays or the Sundays. I think at some point in the future, we will get a place where there will be a Formula One style thing at the end of Premier League matches where there's one TV interview and that's it. That's it. You all have access to that because they can spend probably half an hour, 40 minutes doing the press after the game. And for some of them, it's a joy because they love talking, particularly if they've won. And for some, it's a pain in the backside.
Yeah, it's really interesting actually to see how managers and players react, you know, when it's, particularly if emotion is high, particularly if they've had a bit of a drubbing, how composed they are. So Kasper Schmeichel, Leicester goalie, after a big defeat a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, at Bournemouth, I was there. Yes,
you were there for that one.
It may well have been one of my interviews. Yeah, he was.
Yeah, and he was just so composed, and it was his mistakes that led to the rot setting in, but took it on the chin, accepted the blame, and I thought it was just really impressive the way he dealt with that.
He's probably had, in fact, I would stick my neck out and say almost certainly he'd had very good media training, but also he learned from his dad. And there are those who see talking to the media as part of the job. And for me, I will always say, well, you're not talking to me, you're talking through me to the people who come through the turnstiles, who support your club. Personally, I couldn't give a monkey's whether you talk to me or not. But you're not talking to me. You're talking to the people who, they don't pay their wages, they pay a part of the wages, but they're the club supporters, the people who will be there after you've stopped playing for this club. And if you feel that you need to say something to them, then great. You know, it was interesting, the incident a few weeks ago where the plane was flown over Burnley's ground. Ben Mee, the Burnley captain, if you remember, Mark, he came across and actually demanded to be interviewed to say, this is a disgrace, this does not represent our club. Yeah. And that's great. That's really good, positive PR from football clubs who sometimes don't help themselves.
No. And speaking of media training, you've got a new venture.
Yeah, during lockdown, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, there's lots of time to consider what other avenues to explore. And one of them was certainly to utilize the experience that I've got from over 30 years in TV and radio, but also from doing a spot of teaching at Marjon University in Plymouth on the sports journalism course. And I realized that actually I'm not that bad at teaching. I'm quite good at it. And I looked around and there was no real broadcast media training companies down here in the Southwest. There were a lot of London-based companies, but here in the Southwest, there don't seem to be too many. So I'm in the process of establishing a media training organization, which will utilize other media professionals who are down here in Devon and Cornwall. And we will hopefully be able to be opening our doors soon to give media training to companies, not just sport, obviously other companies as well, on how to appear on TV and on radio, how to relax, how to give good answers, because in the media landscape as it is, if you become known as a good talker for your particular organization, you'll get asked back. And actually that's good publicity. So say, for example, you run a sustainable cafe, which a friend of mine does here in the village where we live. If he can become the go-to person on any sustainability issue, the name of his cafe will be on TV and on radio every time he's interviewed. Free publicity. It's absolutely free publicity. And if you're trained well and you know what you're going to be talking about, then you will get asked time and time again to comment on things, or you'll get asked to be in a feature on local TV, or whether that's national TV. I think there's a lot of scope for it here in the Southwest, and hopefully it will go well.
Yeah, and these days there are a lot more opportunities, aren't there? I mean, it's not just the traditional media, it's the bloggers and the niche websites and the social media platforms and all of that are looking for content and looking for experts.
Yes, absolutely. And it's not only talking into a microphone. It's actually talking to a room full of people. There are a lot of people who are very competent people, but faced with a room of people who are just looking at them, they go to jelly. And I hope I'll be able to help with that as well.
Yeah. And if people want to find out more about that, John, how would they do that?
Excuse me, I've got a tickly throat today. My website is johnroder.com. You can find details on there. My Twitter is @johnroder.com. Just get in touch with either of those ways. There's an email address on my website, and it's something I'm hoping to develop over the next few months and years into something that's a viable proposition for my old age.
Brilliant.
Which is rapidly approaching.
Not at all. Well, John, it's been brilliant to chat to you. Thanks for your time. Enjoy the game this weekend.
Thank you, Mark.
And we'll all be listening out for you on Match of the Day in the future. And maybe we can catch up when the season starts again and see how things are going there.
It won't be that long. I think it's about 6 or 7 weeks. Start of September, we're underway again. It's a year-round sport now, football. The one thing I've missed this summer is actually doing a tournament. Really missed doing a tournament, travelling the world. But staying at home in Devon, it's not a bad second option, is it?
It's not at all. Great to chat, John.
Thanks very much, Mark. Enjoyed it tremendously.